Hi, I'm Dr. Kate Lister, and here are 5 historical myths that are incredibly common. I see them being repeated all the time, and every time I see somebody doing it, I just die a little bit inside. So, this is my attempt to try and dispel them. Alright, number 1. Everyone in the past died before the age of 40. No, they didn't. Just behave yourselves. There's been a lot of research on this. This paper here is just one example of that. What always throws the figures off here is when you have to include infant mortality in any sample throughout history that you're using, because infant mortality was around about 50%, and that holds true for almost any demographic, any time period that's been researched up until the advent of modern medicine. But if you made it past childhood, if you made it to adolescence, you actually stood a reasonable chance of getting to old age. Yeah, we are living much, much longer than today, but it wouldn't have been uncommon for people to hit their 70s, 80s. Pliny the Elder, a Roman writer, for example, has got a whole chapter about people who managed to get to 100, and he lists loads of them. And this paper here you can go and have a look at explores the fact that when you strip out infant mortality, the average life expectancy is around about 70 to 75, which isn't that far off what it is today. So it wasn't the adults that were dying young, it was all of the children, or at least 50% of them, which is grim. But it's not true that 40 or 30 would have been seen as old age in the past, not at all. And speaking of ages, it isn't true that people would regularly have got married age 12 or 13 in the past. You can find examples of that happening, you absolutely can, especially amongst royalty and rich people, because they were solidifying empires and vast fortunes. But that doesn't even mean that the people that got married would have lived together as husband and wife until they were a bit older. It might have happened when the girl got seduced and perhaps was pregnant and made to marry. She might have been married if she didn't have any other resources or anywhere else to go, but it's really, really unusual. This is a chart that shows the average age of first marriage in England and Wales from the 1500s up to 2000, and you can see that pretty much up to about 1950 it stays consistent at around 20. Just under 20, 25-ish, that age bracket. And there's a very good reason for this, because if you were going to go and get married, throughout most of our history actually, that meant that you were going to go and set up your own home. If you were a man, that would mean that you had a wife to support and kids to support. If you were a woman, that would mean you had to run your own household. I don't know if you've ever considered what the disaster would be to get 2 11-year-olds together and go, there you go off and live your lives together. No, you had to have some life experience behind you. So the average age of marriage was round about 20. The people in the past thought that the world was flat. No, they didn't. They didn't, for the very simple reason that it's observable even to the naked eye. If you climb up, if you're at a height, you can see the horizon disappearing over the globe. You can see that it's round. Nobody has ever thought this until quite recently in our history, and fuck knows what's going on with those guys, but it certainly wasn't something that was thought in the Middle Ages. It wasn't thought anywhere. Aristotle knew it, Roman scholars knew it, Greek scholars knew it, medieval scholars knew it. It was known. It was known. The Middle Ages in Europe are called the Dark Ages because there was a lack of sources, not because there was a lack of knowledge. It is a myth that once the Romans left, everybody in Europe lost their minds entirely and went to go and live in a ditch with mud on their head. This is a myth perpetrated by those in the Renaissance who like to see themselves as incredibly enlightened and refined compared to all that stupidity that went before. It's not true. Despite preconceptions, the Middle Ages were a time of great innovation, medical advancement, and technological advancement as well. And finally, that women only entered the workforce in the late 20th century. Nope. Women have always been in the workforce, especially the poorer women who couldn't afford to sit around thinking that they were fancy housewives. You can find examples of women working as physicians in medieval Italy. You can find them owning their own business, usually after their husband died and they became a widow. You can find them all over the place. They were definitely in the workforce. What they weren't was paid the same as men, respected the same as men, and given the same opportunities as men. But I promise you, they have always been there. The cult of the housewife arose in the 1950s and was a really middle-class bourgeoisie white fantasy. It was not the reality for most women. And while we're at it, Vikings didn't have horns on their helmets, Napoleon wasn't short, and Catherine the Great died of a stroke, nothing to do with equestrianism.